The loot of a raid must be passed out to someone. To decide who this someone is, you need to have a loot system in place. After you know who is going to get it, you have to decide if it's really right for them based on what the item is, and what the class and spec that they are. And finally, you have to know how to hand the loot out to them. Let me start off by saying that loot can be a raid breaker. If someone gets loot who shouldn't have gotten it, or you deny loot from people who actually do need it, then your raiders may not believe you have what it takes to be a successful leader, as you have no clue what you're doing with loot. People like downing bosses, but most like to do it for a shot at the loot, not to say they've downed it. So we're going to figure out a good loot system. There are a lot of different types of loot systems. The basic ones are open role, role modifiers, DKP, suicide kings, and loot council. Each one has its benefit, and of course each one has a downfall. First off, remember, if you are running a raid with multiple pugs, you want to make sure that they have a shot at the loot as well. To do so, I would suggest using an open role system with pugs. It's not fair to invite someone in, but allow them not even a chance on the gear they could use. After all, they did allow you to run the raid that night. Now I'm going to run down a quick explanation of each loot system type and why you would use it, as well as the pros and cons of each one. Open role works out well for those who have issues with loot systems, those who don't have consistent teams, those who pug often, or those who don't want to think about anything more than handing out the loot to the highest number. This system is very easy. All you do is /roll to roll, and highest number gets the loot. The drawbacks to this is you don't gear up your raid in a way that pushes progression, but on the bright side, everybody gets a fair chance at each piece of loot they can use. Role modifiers is a system in which you give certain people a chance to add certain numbers to their roll, or roll out of a higher number. You either have them add a number to their roll, such as +3 or +5, or anything of that sort, or you have them roll from 25 to 150 or 50 to 100 instead. This gives them a higher chance of winning the loot, but does not automatically give them the loot over the others. You'd use this system perhaps for a core 10-man group if you're running a 25-man, or for guildies with a few pugs, but be warned, this can cause repercussions in most pugs, or if you have someone who hasn't received any loot in weeks. The pro is, you can get gear to those who need it, but drawbacks are possible arguments over them getting more of a shot at the loot, and you still don't gear your team up as well as you possibly could. DKP stands for Drag and Kill Points, and as the name depicts, has to do with earning and spending points. You earn these for anything you want to, such as attending raids, downing bosses, donating to the guild, progression nights, etc. After accumulating points, you can bid on a piece of gear. Highest bidder wins, and that amount is deducted from your DKP. For example, you have 1500 DKP, and you bid 500 for a piece of gear. You win the bid and get the piece of gear and have 1000 DKP left over. Some groups allow you to roll out of the DKP you are willing to spend, and round up to the highest marker, such as 50. In this example, we'll say you are willing to bid 500 for a piece of gear. You roll, and you roll a 235, and you win. The roll gets rounded up to 250, as we're rounding up to the nearest 50, and that amount is deducted from your DKP. This system gives people a chance regardless of how many points you have earned. These systems reward consistency and rewards attendance. The drawback is you may gear someone too much and neglect gearing others due to someone accumulating a lot of points. It also takes quite a bit of micromanagement keeping all the numbers straight. Next is Suicide Kings. In this system, you have a list of people either by randomly listing names or rolling and putting people in numerical order. The loot gets offered to the top person who could use it. If they take it, they suicide to the bottom of the list. This splits loot out more. However, you can cause someone to skip over upgrades so they can get a specific one they want. The management of this system is a bit tricky, especially when adding new names to the list. The final system is Loot Council. For this, you have a council of at least 3 people to decide who should get what loot. It's a good idea to have an odd amount of people on the council so you never tie if you vote. When loot drops, you see who wants it, and then decide who gets it. You can do this by comparing their current items, or in another way. The major drawback to this system is the fact most people will believe you are biased and giving the loot to a favorite player or a friend. Most of the time this isn't true, but in some cases it is, so it's best to give it to the person who could use it the most due to their current item. Occasionally, when their items are identical, you can require a roll-off of these two to give the loot out. This way, you gear up those who need it and push progression. In the end, all these loot systems have their uses. You have to decide what your team will use. It can be very tricky, and I would advise you to speak with your team about it and go from there. Of course, you can make your own loot system up from a mixture of any of this. Always make sure when you give out loot you are giving it to the right class and spec. For example, if the piece of gear is plate with spirit on it, it should go to a paladin. That's obvious though. If it's cloth and a mage and druid want it, it goes to the mage because the mage cannot roll on leather as well, but the druid can. Remember, primary specs and armor types deserve the loot first. Finally, once you are sure who it should go to, you need to give it to them. You can simply right-click the item as Master Looter. To set Master Looter, right-click your portrait and set Loot to Master Looter. You will automatically be the Master Looter. Once you've done so, a list will pop open and you can choose who to give it to. It's as simple as that. There are some add-ons you can use for looting, and one I would suggest is X-Loot. If nothing else, it color codes the classes so you can easily see who is who. Hopefully, you don't have too much drama over loot and can move on with your raid. With a set loot system and the rules of it laid out, there should be no problems, and if there are, you have the rules they can go look at. Our next video will go over keeping your raiders happy and in the guild. Please thumbs up and subscribe.